Okay, so we're continuing about the very first Milchama in Eretz Yisrael, which is the conquest of Jericho. I want to go back a moment. We had mentioned that the night before, Moshe Shabbos, in other words, before the first Hakafa, so there's a mysterious malach that appears to Yehoshua, and Yehoshua doesn't know who it is initially, and he says, Halanu ata imlit sarenu, are you one of us, or are you an enemy? And the entity says, I am a malach of Hashem, and I am coming because of now, achshav, ata basi. And remember, it's charbo shalufa biyadai, there's an unsheathed sword in his hands. And the Gemara in Megillah explains that the malach is saying, you are chayav misa, because of two averos that you caused the Jewish people to commit. One was that they didn't bring the korban tamid of the afternoon, because you were besieging Jericho, and the other is tonight you were mevatel Torah, nobody was learning, and then he asks the malach, which is the main aveira for which I deserve death, and the malach answered, Atah, the aveira of right now. Right now is night. Right now the aveira is bitul Torah, and you'll remember that the Gemara is mochiach from there, Gadol Talmud Torah Yaiser Makrevas Tamidin, that the mitzvah of learning Torah is even greater than bringing the offerings, because Yehoshua committed two sins, not bringing the korban and not learning, or not having Klal Yisrael learn, and the malach said you're being punished primarily for the Talmud Torah. So it's interesting that there's a Gemara this is a Gemara in Megillah. There's a Gemara in Eruvin that adds something. Maybe it's cholek, or maybe it's actually it's not mashma, it's cholek, but it adds another dimension. It says the malach is communicating a different message, that Yehoshua will not be zeicha to have children. Yehoshua ben Nun died without children. And the Gemara says, why did Yehoshua ben Nun not merit to have children? Because he was mevatel b'nei Yisrael from Pru Urvu one night, because he disabled husbands and wives from being intimate because of this milchama. This is the Gemara in Eruvin. And therefore, Mida Keneged Mida, he prevented the Jewish people from having procreation that night. He was nanash that he died without banim. The Gemara then says an additional thing that's even more obscure. Why was he mevatel them from Purvu? Because it says, Gemiri, we have a tradition that whenever the Aron HaKodesh is not in its proper place in the Kodesh HaKodashim, Asor b'tashmish hamita. When the Aron is not in its makam kavua, husband and wives are not allowed to have relations. And since the Aron was not in the Kodesh HaKodashim, remember, in Gilgal you have the Mishkan, Gilgal. But the Aron was removed from the Kodesh HaKodashim to be part of the war of Jericho. So that created an Isra of Tashmish Hamita. And therefore Yehoshua is responsible for being mevatel, the nation, from Piri of Arabia because of the Isra of Tashmish Hamita. Now, there are many, many, many problems with this Gemara. It turns out that the Gemara is essentially saying that theoretically they could have, in other words, the Gemara doesn't just say, oh, they're involved in war, so they can't have Tashmish Hamita. Theoretically, they could have had Tashmish Hamita at night. But because the Aron is there, Shalom Bimkomo, the Rasur B'Tashmish Hamita. Well, one second. The Aron is there because Hashem commanded. When you go around Jericho, you have to have the Aron. What is Yehoshua supposed to do exactly? What are you blaming him because the Aron is Shalom Bimkomo, thereby creating the Isser of Tashmish Hamita, when it was Al Pi Tzivoy Hashem? But the emes is a little more complicated because the tzivoy Hashem to walk around Yericho with the Aron was not given until after Yehoshua's encounter with the malach. In other words, Hashem then told Yehoshua, walk around with the ark. Which means, when Yehoshua brought the Aron HaKodesh there had not yet been a commandment of Hashem to do so. Yehoshua decided on his own that this was justified. So even though Lamaisa he was right, because Hashem said, you're going to use the Aron to go around Jericho, Yehoshua didn't have a tzivoy at that time. And because he didn't have a tzivoy at that time, he was mevatel es ami piri v'rivi. Theoretically, in other words, he could have brought the Aron after Hashem gave him the command. And that would have given a few hours where people could have had tashmish hamita. But overall, it's still a very, very schwer idea, but look at the dramatic repercussions. Because Yehoshua brought the Aron there, and when the Aron is shalo bimkomo, asur b'tashmish hamita, he is mevatel the nation from tashmish hamita. Therefore, he was not zeicha to have children. That's a very dramatic. Talk about paying interest as a punishment. For a few hours, he was mevatel them from tashmish hamita, so he has no children at all. Mamash ad kedei kach is how Hashem judges the tzaddik. Yeah.
Don't we see by Moshe Rabbeinu's parents that the father made all the couples split up?
I'm sorry, his father.
Moshe.
Yeah.
Didn't his father separate?
His father separated, and yeah.
See that he wasn't punished, or I don't know, was he?
Well, yeah. In other words, well, there are two people who separate. Amram separated from Yocheved after Paro was geyser that the children to be thrown into the Nile. So Amram didn't want to have a child that would go Lamisa, and Miriam gave him Musar. Miriam was 6 years old, and she said that Paro is only geyser on the Secharim, and you're geyser on everybody, and therefore they came back together, and Moshe was born from their union. So Amram was not punished for that. For Keret, Amram was zeicha to have Moshe Rabbeinu. But I think there's a very big difference. Yehoshua was mevatel all of Klal Yisrael from Pru'urvu, right? For one night, right? So that's different than one person. Now Moshe himself was pirish from his wife, from Matan Torah onwards. For 40 years, Moshe was not with his wife. From the time of Matan Torah till Moshe Rabbeinu's death, he was pirish min ha'isha. And the Gemara in Shabbos says this was a decision he made on his own. Hashem didn't command him. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu was maskim to Moshe Rabbeinu's decision, achar hamaisa. So it turns out that the Gemara in Megillah identifies Yehoshua's Aveira as Bittul Torah, in terms of the people not learning. And the Gemara in Eruvin identifies Yehoshua's Aveira as being mevatel the people from Pru'urvu, because the Aron was shalai bimkaimai. But I have to say, it's only for those few hours, because once Hashem commanded that the Aron should be there, then for Shtetzach Yeshua is not going to be responsible, unless there's another possibility, and that is, maybe Hashem expected that after every Hakafah, they bring the Aron back to Gilgal. Because the Aron didn't have to be there 24 hours. Right? The commandment was you circle Yericho once every day with the Aron, and on Shabbos 7 times. Now that didn't take the whole day. Even the 7 Hakafahs didn't take all day. 1 Hakafah for sure doesn't take all day. So what are you supposed to do with the Aron after you finish the Hakafah? So it could be, maybe the Gemara in Eruvin means Yehoshua just kept it there. Maybe the taina was he could have had it returned to Gilgal and brought back every day. I'm just thinking out loud what the taina might have been. That either the taina was he brought the Aron there before Hashem gave the command. That's the first explanation. Or alternatively, even if there's a command to bring the Aron there, There's no command that the Aron stays there. Gilgal is not far. Remember, I mean, Gilgal is is very next to Jericho. So theoretically, the Aron could have been brought back to the Kodesh HaKodashim and taken out every day. Maybe that's the time. Maybe that's what's called a beetle of Piri of Arivia. Yeah.
Two things. Amram, when he separated, he did that. He did. From what I understand, maybe Rashi says he did cause all of Klal Yisrael to separate because everyone looked up to him. So if he was to separate from his wife, then everyone else was separate from his wife. And that's why Miriam said, "No, go get back because now you severed all of Klal Yisrael." So why was he not judged? And then the second question is, at this time, were the people working? Because if they weren't working, then if they were studying Torah, Talmud Chacham is only obligated to be his wife on Friday night. So how are they like? This is like Koravu, they're not doing it. What is it, Shabbos?
Well, it wasn't Shabbos because for Keret. Well, let's see. It would have been Motzei Shabbos because remember the malach came the day before or the night before the first hakafa. Now the first hakafa is Sunday. Jericho was encircled from Sunday through Shabbos. So the malach came Motzei Shabbos.
So why were they obligated to be together?
No, so again, that's not a raya necessarily that they're obligated, but many would have. In other words, even if you're not obligated, people can be connected to their wives. But Yehoshua made it impossible because the Aron was Shalom Kaimai. In other words, that's called a bittul of Piri Verivia, meaning even if there was no obligation for people in a particular Zaman, but they would have, some at least would have done it. Yehoshua was Mavatal. But your first Torah is a good Torah, because if the Pshat is that because Amram separated from Yocheved, other people followed it as well, so that destroys my teretz, right? I wanted to differentiate. I said, well, Amram was only a local one-person thing, and Masha'en Ken Yehoshua was Mavato the whole Am, because the Aron is Shalom Kaimai. So your taina is Amram was also Mavato the whole Am. It's a good kasha. I have to think about it, Taka. Why wasn't Amram Nanash for that cheshbon? Yeah.
Also with Moshe, isn't there a look at whether he extended the days of preparation for Mount Sinai? Or something like that? And if he extended it himself, then that would also be
Yeah. So that's an issue too, where according to one man the Amar, Moshe Rabbeinu added a day of separation to the Matan Torah preparations. So the question becomes, why wasn't Moshe Nanash? Because he was Mavato, Klal Yisrael, from Pru or Vu for one extra night. Yeah, but I think the short answer is that since the Gemara says that Kadosh Baruch Hu was maskim, the Kadosh Baruch Hu held that was a right decision. I mean, there's an nafkamina, meaning if Hashem felt Moshe Rabbeinu's judgment was correct, so that's not going to be an avera. Yehoshua's judgment was incorrect. How do you know ahead of time? You don't, but you have to look at it in retrospect. So remember these two Gemaras, the Gemara in Megillah and the Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara in Megillah talks about Talmud Torah, and the Gemara in Eruvin talks about Bitul Piri Verivia, and it introduces a new idea that there's no source for. It's called Gemiri. Gemiri means like Halach Moshe Misinai, or a tradition that when the Arain is not in its Makayim, they're Asur B'Tashmish Hamita. That raises an interesting question. You think about this. Think about traveling in the Midbar. Right? The Yidden traveled in the Midbar for 40 years. And most of the time they actually were encamped. I mean, there were actually stops in which they remained 19 years. Half of the time they were in one place. But when they travel, I guess that's the question. You really need to look at a map more carefully. Was there such a thing as stopping on the road? Meaning, the Torah lists encampments. Let's say you have 48 stops. So what's the pshat? Did they travel continuously? Let's say from stop. In other words, when they left stop 35. They didn't stop until they reached stop 36? Well, what if it took a day and a night? What if it took 3 days to get there? Meaning, were there concepts of interim rest stops? before they got to destinations. Meaning, the Torah is not defining every single place they stopped. The Torah is defining the places where they encamped. But there may have been a lot of stops in between. Now, it's interesting. If it's an in-between stop, they didn't put up the Mishkan. Right? They only put up the Mishkan in the encampment. So actually, it would appear that the Aron was covered and it was just put down at night. It was not in the Mishkan. The Mishkan was, so it would appear that in those interim rest stops, Tashmish Hamita would be forbidden because the Aron is not in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, to this day, you figure after so many years of learning Chumash, I ought to know the answer to this question. But I honestly don't know. There are 48 stops. Did you travel continuously till you got to the next stop and then there was an encampment? Or were there rest stops? And this, if you say there were no rest stops, then you have to assume that the stops were close enough to each other that you could cover them in one day's journey. Because they must have slept. I don't think it's brought down anywhere that they didn't sleep as they're going from place to place. So that's an interesting question, and it would actually have repercussions on the Tashmish Hamita issue in terms of interim rest stops and the like. Okay. The other thing I want to digress a little bit, and I some of this I said Hoshana Rabbah in the Beis Medrash, so some of you might have heard it, some of you didn't hear it, so forgive me for repeating if you heard it already. We discussed how the Mekubalim understand that the 7 circuits around Jericho are very, very significant because they represent the collapsing of barriers, the collapsing of a mechitza. And that is the essence of the hakafos of both Hoshana Rabbah and Simchas Torah, that we want to collapse, and as well as the chasa, the kala going around the chasan, we want to collapse the mechitzas that separate us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rambam in the Shemona Perakim say that all chatayim and all bad midas are mechitzas hamavdilais. They are walls. They are barriers of separation that separate us from the Almighty. Mechitza mamish. It's a mechitza. A mechitza. In fact, the Rambam describes that this is how we understand different levels of nevuah. It's very, very clear that nevuah is a very high madrega, but there are different madregos within nevuah. There are greater neviim, there are lesser neviim. Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest navi. And how do Chazal describe Moshe Rabbeinu? That all the neviim perceived HaKadosh Baruch Hu biaspaklaria she'ena me'ira, a lens that is cloudy, an opaque lens, meaning not very clear. Moshe Rabbeinu perceived HaKadosh Baruch Hu biaspaklaria hame'ira, a lens that was clear, transparent. So the Rambam explains that even the greatest Nevi'im had small imperfections of character. They were not perfect. And the small imperfections of character create mechitzas. So the reason why the aspaklaria is eina me'ira is that whatever defect or deficiency is within a person becomes a blockage of the divine light. And because Moshe Rabbeinu was mashlim himself, as far as any human being could possibly go, there were no pagamim. If there were no pagamim, there is no mechitza. But the Rambam says there was one mechitza, because here's the thing. Even an aspaklaria, me'ira, even a clear lens is still a lens. You're not directly. In fact, there were people who used to be machmir. It's not the minhag today, but there were machmirim that if they were reading the Torah, they had an aliyah, they would take off their glasses. They would not read the Torah through their glasses because they said that's a hefsek between the letters and their eyes, and you have to read it with your eyes. Okay, that's not our minhag today, but there was such an opinion. And the point is that even lenses are a blockage. So the Rambam says, what blockage did Moshe Rabbeinu have? Aspaklaria Meira is still a blockage. Zok the Rambam, the fact that he was a basar v'dam in a body. The one thing that Moshe could not totally escape, was he's in a guf. So that was the one pagam that still required an aspaklaria, a lens, even though it was meira. And the Rambam says that bad midas are mechitas. So going back to hakafas, so hakafas are collapsing the mechitzas hamavdilas. So here, I shared again Hoshana Rabbah, an interesting thought of Rav Soloveitchik, in which he differentiated between the hakafas of Sukkos and Hoshana Rabbah and the hakafas of Simchas Torah. Sukkos and Hoshana Rabbah is mamish like Yericho, for 6 days, except on Shabbos. Of course, Yericho, we did it even on Shabbos. That's interesting. But during Sukkos, we go around the bima once. Hoshana Rabbah, we go around 7 times. Mamish like Yericho. 1 circuit every day, 7 circuits, the last. So, but then we do the 7 circuits again on Simchas Torah. So what's the nafkamina? So he said the following. Let's picture the hakafas of Sukkos. We walk around the bima holding the lulav and esrog. And we're walking around Sifrei Torah, meaning to say the Torahs are taken out, or at least one Torah is taken out of the Oren. It is held by somebody, and essentially we are walking around the Torah with our lulavs. And we do that during Sukkot, we do that on Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah, all the Torahs are taken out, but it's the same idea. So Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, you walk around the Torah with your lulav. Simchas Torah, you walk around the bima with the Torah. You don't walk around the Torah. You walk around with the Torah. Right? That's the mental picture, right? The picture is different. So Rav Soloveitchik says the following. Lulav represents mitzvahs maisias. Lulav is an example of practical mitzvahs that we do. So, if you go with the idea that hakafa is the collapsing of barriers, what you're doing is we are collapsing the barriers that separate us from the Torah by the doing of mitzvahs. The doing of mitzvahs will give us the ability to come close to Hashem's Torah. And the reason is, the pasuk says in Mishlei, we say it every morning in Moda'ani, Reishis Chachma, Yiras Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is to fear Hashem, to obey Hashem's commandments. So through the commandments, we prepare ourselves to receive the light of the Torah. Now, what does that mean practically? A person could learn even if they're not from, right? There are people who learn who are apikorsim. I mean, they enjoy the intellectual study of it or whatever it would be. But learning Torah is much more than picking up knowledge. It's more than learning facts. Learning Torah is something that elevates you, brings you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's the light of the Torah that enters your neshama. But that light requires Yiras Hashem. And that light requires submission to Hashem. So the meaning of the Hakafos of Sukkot is, through the mitzvahs, we now connect to the Torah. That's stage one. Hakafa collapses the mechitzais that separate me from Torah through my shmiras hamitzvahs, based on Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem. But Simchas Torah is a higher level. Simchas Torah, I'm not trying to collapse the barriers between me and the Torah. I'm trying to collapse the barriers between me and Hashem. So, I circle the Torah with the Torah as if to say, through the Torah, I become connected to God. So through the mitzvahs, I become connected to the Torah. Through the Torah, I become connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the progression. That the limud HaTorah directly connects you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because we say that the Torah is the Ratzon of Hashem, and therefore when I connect to Hashem's Ratzon, because Hashem is an indivisible unity, connecting to the will of Hashem is the same as connecting to Hashem. That's the statement, Kudshu Brichu V'Yarais Echadu, the Torah and Hashem are one. Now, it's interesting, there's a nigun they sing. We didn't sing in Simchas Torah, but it's often sung in Simchas Torah. Yisrael V'Yarais V'Kudsha Barichu Chadu. Klal Yisrael, the Torah, and Hashem are one. But as far as I know, and I'm not a Bucky in the Zohar at all, as far as I know, there is no Zohar that says that. What the Zohar says, Kudshu Brichu V'Yarais Echadu. The Zohar says, Hashem and the Torah are one, which makes a lot of sense, because the Torah is Hashem's will. Hashem's will is the same as Hashem's essence, because you can't divide Hashem into pieces. So Memela, Hashem's will is Hashem's essence. I connect to the will, I connect to the essence. To say Yisrael is one with Torah and God, that can't have the same meaning. Maybe it means we get united to Hashem, but it can't mean we're the same. So I don't know where that's from. It's interesting to do research on that. Yisrael, because it's a very famous nigun. Yisrael v'Yaraisa v'Kudsha Brichu Chadhu. But the lashon of the Zayar that's brought in the Nefesh HaChaim does not mention Yisrael in the Maimer. It just mentions Kudsha Brichu v'Yaraisa Chadhu. So you see the progression. Through the mitzvahs, I connect to Torah. Through the Torah, I connect to Hashem. And just to mention something not directly related, the Chidushei Harim once described Hakafos in a very, very powerful way. Now, there's all sorts of, again, in Or Samech it's not a big problem, most yeshivas it's not a problem, but in Shuls, occasionally there are all sorts of problems. Who was honored with a Hakafa, who didn't get a Hakafa. People get offended. Hasidim like to tell a famous story in the early years of Hasidus where Hasidim were arguing with Misnagdim. So they tell a story about a Chassid who comes to a Misnagdish Shishol and they're having Hakafas. And the Chassid asks if he could be the announcer there. So they give him, for some reason they give it to him. And he says, the next Hakafa, we're honoring all of those who are modest and humble. And of course, all of these Balei Gaiva Misnagdim come forward claiming to be modest and humble, right? Again, the whole idea was to show, you're a Bal Gaiva in how humble you think you are, whatever it would be. So people fight with Hakafas. But the Chidushei Harim once said to someone, he said, you ought to think twice whether you want to take a Sefer Torah. Because we know that there is a concept in Beis Din that a person makes a shvuah sometimes. Sometimes you've got to make a shvuah, right? There are cases where you have to swear. And the most chomor type of shvuah is when you take a Sefer Torah and you swear holding the Sefer Torah. This is called Nikitas Chayfetz. That makes a shvuah very, very chomor. Breaking such a shvuah is the greatest avera. So the Chidushei Harim says, I don't want to scare you for next Simchas Torah. When you take a Sefer Torah, you are making a Shavua to Hashem, b'nekitas chayfetz, that you're going to try to live by what the Sefer Torah says. So he told the man, he said, maybe you ought to be relieved you didn't get a hakafa. Are you ready to make that commitment? Powerful thing, right? But that's what it is. Through the Torah, we connect to Hashem. That was Rav Soloveitchik's idea. And therefore, when you go around the bima with the Sefer Torah, you're going around the Shekhinah. You're not going around the Torah. You're going around, what are you going around? You're going around the Shekhinah. The truth is, before Rav Soloveitchik, the Gra writes that the dance around the bima is a dance around the Shekhinah, and he actually would not allow children to sit on the raised steps or whatever it is, because he says this is the makam of the Shekhinah. You're not allowed to sit there. Right? So this is all connected to the idea of Yericho. Okay. Now, be it as it may, we have the 7 circuits, 1 circuit a day, or 6 circuits for 6 days, and then on Shabbos, 7 hakafos, and the Kohanim are blowing 7 shofros, and the Aron is behind the Kohanim, and in front of the Kohanim is one part of the army, in back of the Kohanim is another part of the army, so you have, again, a procession of 4 groups, soldiers, 7 Kohanim, carriers of the Aron who are also Kohanim, then other soldiers. Make a hakafa, the shofars are blown, for 6 days, total silence other than the shofar blowing, and then on the 7th day after 7 hakafos, a great shout, and the walls fall down. Now, Yehoshua declared in his military instruction that when you then enter the city and you conquer the city, remember, we still have to conquer it, so to speak, Yehoshua made a tanai that no one can take any of the spoils of war, whether it's animals, clothing, gold, silver, jewelry, a lot of wealth. There is normally a provision that when we wage a milchemes mitzvah, the shalal is permitted to be taken by soldiers. In the case of Yericho, all of the shalal was prohibited, but it was prohibited in 2 forms. Some of the shalal has to be destroyed. That includes the animals, clothing, and the like. And some of the shalal is given to glorify the Mishkan. And that's the gold, silver, right? So the metal stuff, the metal and the jewels, go to the Mishkan. And even the animals were not korbanos. The animals and the clothing were simply destroyed. And Yehoshua declared this to be a cherem. Cherem means kind of excommunicated, prohibited, and the like. Now, an interesting question that the Meforshim have a machlokas on is, it doesn't say that Hashem gave Yehoshua that command. Just as Yehoshua decreed. So, does this mean Hashem told him this is the way it is? Or is it just Yehoshua's own gezerah because he feels that we shouldn't be nana? But ben kach uben kach, whether it is Yehoshua's own initiative or HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, this is absolutely unique to Yericho, because all the other cities that we conquered, the shalal was permitted to be taken. Now, people do point out, though, that what's going on with Yericho does have a parallel in the Torah itself, and that is the parsha of Hanidachas. The parsha of Hanidachas, which is a Jewish city, is in Parshas Shoftim. And what does Hanidachas mean? If a majority of a city, chas v'shalom, rove the avodah zarah, so the Torah says the city must be wiped out, everything must be destroyed, and the city should be a teil olam, it should be an eternal dump, lo yibana od, never to be rebuilt. What about the minority who didn't worship? And again, Hanidachas can be triggered with 51% of the inhabitants worshiping idols. So what happens to the 49%? So they don't get killed. The 49% do not get killed, but they lose their property as well. It actually literally mentions that tzaddikim leave the city naked. It's a bit of a question of how exactly literal is that? But they, I mean, does that literally mean, no clothing at all? We bring them blankets, what do we do? Okay, that's a little bit of a machlokas if they have the clothes on their back. But they absolutely have nothing beyond the clothes on their back. That's for sure. Everything is lost. So if you think about this, the model of Yericho, now the Torah is talking about a Jewish city in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Sometimes people make a joke, they consider Tel Aviv Hanidachas, but okay. Baruch Hashem, it's not. But Yericho is a non-Jewish city, but if you think about this, the protocol of Yericho seems to be very modeled on Hanidachas. We kill the inhabitants, we burn and destroy the property, and we'll also see that Yehoshua commanded that the site never be built up again, no city ever be constructed. So in some ways you can simply say, okay, Yericho was judged like an Hanidachas. But I think there are two problems with simply saying it's Hanidachas. Maybe three problems. Problem number one is every city in Canaan was in Hanidachas. Meaning if you're going to simply say, oh, they're just following Hanidachas rules, then shalal should never be permitted in any city, and yet in every other city it was permitted. Yericho was not the only idolatrous city in Eretz Yisrael. We're sure of that. The second thing is, it is a little different because by Hanidachas everything gets destroyed. Here, there was the metal and the gold and the silver that was given to the Mishkan. Hanidachas, there was nothing that was salvaged to be given. So it's not quite Hanidachas. And if it is, it's not clear why there wouldn't be the same halacha for the other cities. By the way, as a little aside, I'll tell you a cute story. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, at the end of Chelek, talks about Hanidachas. And it mentions that in many, many cases, we will not destroy the city. And it mentions, even if there's one mezuzah in the city, one mezuzah, we're not going to destroy the city. So if there's even one person who doesn't have to be from, but from enough to have a mezuzah, that's enough to be matzil the city. So the head of the Turei Karta in Eretz Yisrael for many years, a famous person, a chashuv person, was Rav Amram Blau. Rav Amram Blau was the head of the Turei Karta. Many, many times he was an Ohev Yisrael, a big tzaddik. Many times he was beaten by the police in the early years of the state. Many times he was thrown in prison. He was a big kanoi no matter what. He refused to take a neged bus, for example. He was what you might call ultra-Orthodox in Turei Karta. He was not the reformed Turei Karta that take buses or whatever it is. He would not benefit from the government on anything. If he had to go to a hospital, it would be an Arab hospital, whatever it is. He would not take anything from the state. So he was mamish l'shem shamayim. In fact, it's funny. It's a little bit of a cosmic sense of humor here. He had property. He owned property b'Yerusha going back hundreds and hundreds of years that the government wanted to appropriate, and they offered him compensation. He refused to accept anything from the Israeli government, so they just confiscated his property by eminent domains. And he refused to sell it. He refused to take money. They just take it. That is the property on which the Knesset is built. So the Knesset is built on real estate that was owned by the head of the Turei Karta, who totally rejected the legitimacy of Medinat Yisrael. I don't know what to make of that, but that's just the story. Okay. Now, Rav Amram Blau, yeah.
This idea that if there's one mezuzah, a city wouldn't be destroyed, how does that work with Sodom and Gomorrah?
Well, Southern Amar, first of all, no one had any mezuzahs there. This is pre-Matan Torah, so that didn't come up. Even Lot didn't have a mezuzah, in all probability.
Assuming there would be one righteous person.
Yeah, but apparently the Gemara doesn't take it as one righteous person. It says the mezuzah itself provides a shmirah. Now, Rav Amram Blau had, I think, an older brother who was Rav Moshe Blau. Rav Moshe Blau was also a big tzaddik. But they had different hashkafas. Rav Moshe Blau was the head of Agudas Yisrael. Now, Agudas Yisrael is a frum party, but Agudas Yisrael works with the government. Agudas Yisrael participated, right, even to this day. I mean, Degel HaTorah, is kind of the descendant of Agudas Yisrael. It was like a from political party of most of the yeshiva world, Aguda. So Rav Moshe Blau was Aguda, and Rav Amram Blau was a Turei Karta, and both Chashuv, both Talmidei Chachamim, but one was willing to work within the framework of the state, b'daichik, and the other said he will absolutely accept nothing. So Rav Moshe Blau once said, "What's the difference between me and my brother?" He says, "Imagine there's a city in Eretz Yisrael that Chas v'Shalom is an Hanidachas. So what I would do is, I would rush to put up a mezuzah before the Beis Din comes, so we could save the city. My brother would rush to pull down the mezuzah, so the city could be destroyed." He says that's because we ought to get rid of rishus. Don't give excuses. Don't tolerate. He says, I would rush to put up the mezuzah. My brother would rush to take down the mezuzah. He says that's the nafkamina between Rav Amram and Rav Moshe. Being as it may, I do want to point out that one should not connect Rav Amram to modern Turei Karta. Modern Turei Karta has become a little crazy in some ways. Even things like Holocaust denial, God forbid, and being mishabeach, Iranian terrorism, and Hamas. Rav Amram Blau was very, very fanatical about having nothing to do with the Medina, but he was totally against violence. Much violence was done to him. He was beaten up and dragged in the street. He would not respond with any type of violence, and he had a genuine Avas Yisrael. So again, he was totally against the state of Israel, but he would never hurt or insult another Jew. So he was really an unusual person in that way. But he was a kanai, and he felt if something was bad, it should be uprooted and destroyed. So that's how you're pulling down the mezuzah. So get rid of the Hanidachas. Yeah.
How does the Torah respond to if a city is of idol worship, completely destroyed, never settled, or with the concept of the lower something falls, the higher it can go? Like the same thing with like the sin of Adam Rishon is like there's like a concept that they knew to eat it, so then they can even rise even higher.
Well, again, those are ideas that mainly come from Hasidus and the like. It's not always clear that that's true because, for example, we talk about a 50th level of Tumah. So yeah, you can fall very, very low, and even if you fall very, very low, there's a potential for high aliyah. But there's also a certain point of level number 50, like in Mitzrayim, where if you hit level number 50, there is a point of no return. So Hanidachas already is an idea of a big point.
There's a concept of like where the Dead Sea is now, if that was Sodom and Gomorrah,
yeah.
And when Mashiach comes, it's going to be like Gan Eden, if you realize?
Yes, that's true. But once again, all sorts of tikkunim can occur, limosa Mashiach, which are not really shayach to the olam hazeh that we live in now. Yeah, so you're right. If you're asking me, can the people of Hanidachas have some type of tikkun at that later level? Maybe, yeah. But in this world, we can't allow it to exist. We have to totally destroy it. So we'll talk tomorrow about this idea of a little bit of a mystery. On one hand, Jericho is very close to the model of Hanidachas. On the other hand, if that's the case, why would it only be Jericho? Every city, every Canaanite city in Eretz Yisrael would have been an Hanidachas. And yet, in all the other cities, we were allowed to take the shalal. Was there a question before? Yeah.
How does Hanidachas literally translate?
Hanidachas means a city that has been pushed away. Meaning, there are two types of enticers in the Torah. Mesis meidiach. A mesis is one who entices an individual or less than a city. A meidiach is one who influences an entire city. So that's mesis umeidiach, right? So Hanidachas is a city that has been pushed away from Hashem by enticement.
And one more thing, did Yehoshua in the end end up having children or no?
Yehoshua did not have children. Yehoshua ben Nun did not have children. He died without banim, and the Warren Erevin says because he was mevatel es ha'am mipshir yivaruvia. Okay, see you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.